It was the first days of May 2017 when I set off my first email to Sony Music. Excitement was in the air. Having remastered albums for other labels, I wanted to do it for myself, professionally. I got into audio remastering in the late 1990s. This was in a bedroom converted to a home office. I set up my turntable on the desk with the intention of transferring vinyl that had not yet been put to CD into the computer and cleaning it up for transfer to CDR. This was back when a CD recorder drive was new to the market and cost $500. Prior to this, I'd been archiving my old vinyl to minidisc. Remember these? I didn't think so. The name Rubellan Remasters was first published in 2015 on the Suburban Lawns reissue that I remastered for the Futurismo label. People ask me all the time, what does Rubellan mean? I only tell them the basics. It's an inside joke that stems from a party from the early 1990s. The alien's name is Ruby. It comes from the planet Rubella, which makes it Rubellan. See? All cleared up. I had no interest in a typically bland black and white logo for my label, so I designed the alien to be colorful, creepy, and campy. I wanted it to have a sort of throwback cheesy sci-fi theme, and considering the B-movie style of my narration in these episodes, I guess it fits. When I got a response from Sony, it was from someone else. Apparently, the person I sent a message to was not the proper contact, so she forwarded it off to the correct person, who turned out to be a sales manager. Her initial email opened up with the following. Sony's policy is to issue manufacturer deals rather than a direct license deal. This is what's known as a finished goods deal. Finished goods deals are pretty much all-encompassing in that they cover the master rights, the publishing, the full manufacturing of the final product, and the shipping to the client. The only thing it doesn't really include is the audio remastering and the artwork layout. This is different than a license-out deal. With a license-out deal, they just provide the master rights. This is the way the UK have been doing it. She closed her email by stating the following. I'm happy to review your request and provide feedback. Can you have the attached request form completed? Once I have this, we will set up a phone call and I will walk you through the process and the next steps. The request form looks like this. The first title I requested was the 1983 album by Altered Images titled Bite. As mentioned in the previous video, I wanted to give the catalog a proper CD representation. Since I didn't yet know the process, because we never did have that phone call she mentioned, I followed up a week later. She replied and said she'd be back in touch when she gets some feedback. 6 weeks later, she replies and tells me that she's received preliminary approval and that she was putting it through the legal process for final clearance. She says the total cost to me would be $4.25 per unit for 1,000 units and asked if I'm okay with that before she proceeds. $4.25? That's a lot better than I was anticipating. Yeah, I'm good with that. Oh, and they also don't require any sort of payment until the product is completely manufactured and ready to ship. Okay, sounds good to me. Since I was encouraged by the pricing, I requested Pinky Blue in June and Happy Birthday in July. I followed up with her and asked if she had heard anything because I had no idea how long the legal process takes. She replies and says it can generally take 12 to 14 weeks. Well, that's good to know. I asked about getting new high-resolution transfers of the masters, since I didn't want to work from old sources. She said the cost to me would be around $700 to $1,200, and they could just add it to the per-unit cost. I was fine with that. I finally wanted it done right. I was all very polite with please and thank you all over the place. Unfortunately, later in August, I found out that Cherry Red Records was going to be putting out one of their mini clamshell box sets of the Altered Images recordings, including all 3 original albums with an extra disc of 12-inch mixes. That sucks. Since I knew the way they compile a lot of their releases from pre-existing sources, I knew it was going to be problematic. I emailed the sales manager and asked her to cancel all 3 requests. She offered her condolences and also offered 2 phone numbers in case I wanted to talk through anything. That seemed nice. The Cherry Red box set came out many months later. Predictably, there were issues with it, and I certainly wasn't satisfied with it. I ended up dumping it on eBay. I was a little suspicious at this point because the catalog hadn't been touched in over 10 years, and I'd been posting on social media and online forums that I had been trying to acquire the albums. Knowing that Cherry Red have a good relationship with Sony and can get things cleared pretty quickly, I couldn't help but wonder if perhaps someone saw my postings and thought, let's go get it before he can. I don't know. Am I being paranoid? Maybe not. I noticed on my list of Facebook followers, there was someone associated with Cherry Red. It turned out to be a manager who's involved in selecting what reissues they pursue. So maybe there was something to it. But I decided to push forward and send in a few new requests. This time I requested, bow wow wow, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. My thinking was, since I missed out on the Altered Images catalog, maybe I can do bow wow wow. The next one was Set by the Thompson Twins. This would be my effort to correct the problems with the shoddy Edsel reissue. And the last one is the 1984 compilation album by Altered Images titled Collected Images. My original idea was to do a colored vinyl reissue with an attached DVD of the promo videos. Soon after I canceled the Altered Images catalog and submitted the 3 replacement titles, I found the name of someone on the UK side of Sony licensing. I sent him an email and asked if there was a way I could possibly work directly with him in an effort to avoid a similar situation happening like with the Altered Images catalog. He replied promptly and said, "What a coincidence! I'm on the phone with Cherry Red right now." Right there shows you the kind of relationship they have. I can't even get a phone call from the person who said in her first message that we'd have a phone call. He suggested that I continue to work with the sales manager that I had been because he's not allowed to work directly with clients in another country. I would have to go through my local office. All right, I'll try. A couple of weeks after I submitted the 3 replacement requests, I got quotes for each. It wasn't quite as encouraging as the first quote I had received. The bow wow wow was okay, and I approved going forward with that one. The Altered Images LP plus DVD was definitely expensive, so I asked them to convert it to a CD plus DVD. The Thompson Twins was disappointing. They wanted $8 per unit for it? That was puzzling, especially considering it was nearly twice the price of that first Altered Images quote I had received. At the time, I wasn't confident it would make its money back, so I canceled that one. The reason why Altered Images was so important to me was because my best friend, Jay Adams, called me in September 2015 and informed me that he had just been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. My friendship with Jay was very unique. We met in 1996 through an ad in the back of Goldmine Music magazine. He was looking for Altered Images video material, and at that time I was obsessed with the idea of seeing those music videos again. I hadn't seen them since probably around 1983. I wrote this stranger a letter, this was back in the days of paper and pen, and told him that while I didn't have any video material, I'd certainly be happy to buy copies off of him if he had any. I included my phone number and mailed it off. To my surprise, I got a phone call from him later that week. We immediately began talking about music, and it was clear that we had very similar tastes. I'd say about 90% overlap. We talked about movies and humor, and it was obvious we were long-lost brothers cut from the same misfit cloth. He was a huge music video collector and had several of the Altered Images videos from years earlier. That was exciting. Since I had a number of artists in my music collection that I discovered from Trouser Press that he had never heard of, we started tape trading. He would send me these 2-hour compilations of random music videos, some of which I hadn't seen in over a decade, others I never even knew existed. I would send him various artist compilations on audio tape of bands he had never heard of, some of which he fell in love with. Ah, the glory days of the mixtape. We definitely talked on a regular basis and had the phone bills to prove it. I only met Jay once in person, and that was in 2003. He flew to Ohio from Louisiana, and we went to Cedar Point Amusement Park and spent a few days together. At this time in 2017, Jay was having a hard time. He'd been through chemo and temporary remissions, but it just came back and continued to spread. What was somewhat surprising about this is Jay was always extremely health conscious. He exercised all the time and watched what he ate, most of the time anyway. He was very proud of the fact that he still fit in the same size jeans that he'd wore back in high school. The Collected Images compilation was to be a tribute to our connection. It was the band that we both loved that brought us together a couple of decades earlier, and I wanted it to be a sort of monument for this special friendship. Soon after, I submitted a few more reissue requests, including the other Sony-owned Bow Wow Wow albums. Sea Jungle. I Want Candy. I also asked if there was a way they could check with the UK in advance to ensure we don't have any overlapping requests. She said she'd give it a shot. A couple of months later, in October, she said she got a response back from the UK about my current requests and everything was okay. Also in October, I was introduced to a new sales associate that was just hired to be the new point of contact for requests going forward. I went ahead and submitted a couple of others. Sparks, introducing Sparks. Adoraxia, the Unexplained. I wanted to do the Sparks album because it had only been reissued once on CD in the past, and that was by the band. It was also mastered from vinyl. I wanted to license directly from Sony so I could finally access the master tapes and do it correctly. The Adoraxia album is something I had only been familiar with for the last year, and at the time, the album was going for big bucks, even on beat-up vinyl. I think I paid $80 for this copy. By December, it appeared that the sales associate they brought on was useless. I had sent her a number of messages and she hadn't replied to any, despite having requested confirmation of receipt on a couple of them. She didn't care. I guess I'd been spoiled by how quickly Cherry Red got responses and approvals from the UK side when I was working with them years earlier. I just assumed I would have a similar experience. But I would eventually come to find that the way the USA and the UK offices of all three major labels operates is very different. As a result, I called the sales manager. I had called her once before and left her a voicemail that she never replied to. This time when I called, I expressed my concern about this new sales associate, and I also explained the semi-urgency regarding the Altered Images compilation. I told her about Jay and the fact that he had been battling cancer and that this project was to be a tribute to our friendship. She never replied, either by email or by phone. Having had my fill of both of these sales people, I wrote an email to another sales manager within their department. I didn't know if maybe she'd be her boss. She replied very nicely and said that while she can't assist, she directed me to the person who could assist, who was now copied on this thread. He turned out to be the boss of the sales department. He replied and said that he'd like to have a phone call about the situation. We planned a time, and when it happened, I was pretty surprised by some of the things he had said. He told me the complaints I had about this sales manager were nothing new to him. He'd heard similar before. Right there, I'm wondering, then why is she still like that? He also said, if you think she's been unresponsive up to now, if she knew you and I were having this phone conversation, it would be worse. Who's the boss? Why is she still allowed to act this way if you know this is what she's like? He said he was going to go directly to the sales associate and tell her to have 3 titles fully cleared for me during Q1 of 2018. He said he was going to her to avoid the sales manager knowing of this discussion. I couldn't help but think, like the sales associate isn't going to tell her. Soon after the phone call, I got my first ever message from the sales associate. Imagine that. She reiterated what I was told by the big boss, that they will clear 3 titles within Q1 of 2018. Sounds good to me. A couple of months later, in March 2018, I still hadn't received any updates, so I sent an inquiry. I ended up getting a clearance for the Adoraxia album. Cool. It's a start. I immediately got an email from the release planners with a full rundown of all the steps going forward. That was a nice change. Why couldn't the sales department be like that? Later in March, I sent an inquiry about the first Bow Wow Wow request. It had been in the final clearance process for the last 6 months. I thought they said it would only take 12 to 14 weeks. I understand it has to go through the UK office, but come on. And then it happened. I found out that Cherry Red were putting a box set out including everything that I had requested. Not for 1 second do I believe this was another coincidence. I don't buy that they had their request in before me, especially considering that I know how quickly they received clearances while my request was languishing in final clearance for half a year. Not to mention I had been given the all clear when the UK side was asked a short time earlier. Needless to say, I canceled my 3 requests, and then when the Cherry Red box set did come out many months later, it was garbage. There were a lot of vinyl transfers on it that didn't need to be there. They had only mentioned 2 in the booklet, and those were from a noisy flexi disc, but there were a lot more. I would have done it properly and from master tapes. So now we had another artist catalog ruined by their budget mastering methods. After having this project snatched out from under me, I started to refer to them as the Reissue Mafia. It happens again down the road. And I guess you could say that I learned the hard way that when you're working on a project, you don't post about it on the internet because someone could be watching. During the last days of March, I got a message informing me that the master tape for the Collected Images compilation was transferred to high-resolution digital from the UK side. I also received 3 new quotes. By this point, I had already gotten my foot through the door at Warner and Universal and was trying to get some reissues through them. A couple days after I received the quotes, I get a message from the sales associate saying, "Are you going to move forward with any of these new quotes?" So I replied to her and told her that I was working with the other 2 majors and I had to see what the budget held for me so I can decide what I want to move forward with. She sends me the following response.
Please note that I cannot continue to move forward in the clearance process with any of the titles that you have not budgeted for. In the future, I cannot allocate resources and workloads to departments to process your requests without the ultimate expectation of commitment to the project and budget planning for the titles you have asked for.
Excuse me?
Who do you think you're talking to?
So let me clear this up for you. At this stage in the process, no one has any obligation to follow through with anything. No money has been exchanged, no contracts have been signed. She was only providing initial quotes, and she already knows full well that I might not necessarily approve of a quote and might cancel it right then and there. So her authoritative tone was definitely very premature. Needless to say, I had a bite back for her. I had waited 7 months but was not provided quotes and was continuously dismissed when inquiring about the status on why no quotes were being received, while titles I approved of were being snatched out from under me by another label while my titles had no movement. I budgeted for every title that had received an initial quote that I approved of and had moved on to the next step. I am not expecting you to move forward with the clearances on titles until I approve the quotes. A couple of days later, I told her to proceed with 2 of the titles. I asked her to please reply as confirmation of receipt. Twice. She didn't reply. At this point, I was done trying to work with those 2. I'd had enough. I sent the following email to them and also included the big boss from the phone call. It states the following, in part, "You 2 have made this past year so unnecessarily difficult and frustrating with your complete inability for common courtesy and your unprofessional, disrespectful behavior. Throughout the process, I had to virtually beg for answers, much of which was ignored. And when the sales associate entered the picture, it only increased the problem. Perhaps if someone would have taken a moment to explain the process at the beginning, it might not have been such a tedious mystery how certain things worked. But when titles are ignored and attitude is given on the occasional inquiry, clearly something is wrong with this process. It's clear that the sales prevention team views clients as little more than a nuisance." I notified the release planners that I intended to follow through with the Adoraxia project, especially since everything was already completed regarding the artwork and mastering and was with the manufacturer. Might as well get something out of this. Not long after I canceled everything else and cut ties with Sony, I saw on LinkedIn that the sales associate had been moved to a different department. Shocking. Prior to starting these videos, I checked LinkedIn, and neither the sales manager or the former sales associate are still with the company. Too little too late. A while down the road, I crossed paths with someone who previously worked at Sony and had greater familiarity with this sales manager. I was told the issues I had were only the tip, and it was apparently much worse. How people who suck at their jobs hold on to those positions for years or even decades is one of life's great mysteries. A little while later, Sony USA entirely cut off licensing for third-party labels. Or so a lot of clients thought when they received emails stating that was the case. In fact, they allowed a select few clients to continue licensing, at least for a time. Eventually, they would reopen third-party requests, but now as license-out deals rather than finished goods. Oh, and they made it next to impossible to meet their new requirements. Aside from grossly increasing their prices to where you might be lucky to break even only if you have a hit, but they wouldn't proceed unless clients get a consent form signed by every member of a band that they approve of the reissue. Good luck with that. It might work for a solo artist, but not likely with a full band. The big disappointment about being pushed to my limit and cutting ties with Sony is that I had not yet been cleared to do the Altered Images compilation. In anticipation for what I thought was a pending final approval, I had already started preparing the artwork. I eagerly awaited the arrival of my firstborn, the Adoraxia CD, The Unexplained. Sony had pulled out 2 copies of the master tapes, the original and a production master, and sent them to Battery Studios for transfer. Once completed, I received a link to download the high-resolution digital transfers to remaster. The artwork for my CD and for all of my releases, and most reissues put out for some years now on any label, come from scanning the original LP cover and restoring. I've heard many stories of how the labels threw out the original artwork elements years ago, thinking they'd have no use for them in the future. Or, in the case of Universal, when I visited the Iron Mountain Vault in 2017, we saw boxes and boxes of unorganized original artwork films tucked away, likely never to be cataloged. Once I created the artwork files for the CD and prepared a DDP file, which is a disk image file that includes all the music with custom spacing between tracks, as well as the CD text information, I sent it to Sony for review. Once approved, these files are forwarded to the manufacturer for production of the final product. I received the pallet of stock in late April 2018. I was extremely excited to see the first real product on my own label. The CD was released exclusively on my website on April 27, 2018. Being a brand new label, I hadn't yet connected with a distributor to give it a wider release. When I sold my first 30 copies of this 1,000 unit pressing, I was thrilled. Adoraxia, The Unexplained, is an experimental occult-themed electronic album created primarily on the Moog synthesizer and released in 1975. Mort Garson was the man behind the name and came from a background of writing music for the likes of Doris Day and Mel Torme, so I'm sure the second turn at dark-themed electronic music surprised many. Amazingly, RCA released a 45 from the album, the title track. I guess that's the one to have picked because it has a disco vibe to it, that genre just coming into vogue at that time. Another very popular song from this album is called Deja Vu. While the catalog number of this CD is 03, it unexpectedly ended up my first release. Catalog numbers 1 and 2 were both coming from Warner, but there had been a series of manufacturing issues that pushed both of those titles out later. I had only found out about this album the year previous, having been familiar with Garson's first occult-themed outing in 1971, which was my second release and will be discussed next. Aside from being a new fan of this album myself, I felt the scarcity of the original LP would make this first ever CD reissue a welcome addition for underground collectors. Having been my first release, I'm still generally happy with it. It was the first time I took on the artwork for what was to be a commercially released title. The only thing I'm not thrilled with is the format of the legal lines. This was before I started using text boxes, so I just made it a bunch of jagged-looking sentences. But if that's the only disappointment with it years later, I'll consider it a win. My second release came via Universal Music Group. I got a contact for them in September 2017, provided to me by someone who worked at a publishing company. At the time, I was inquiring about the album by Trees called Sleep Convention and was told to check back in a couple of weeks to see if they've managed to find some documentation, as the contract had not yet been scanned into their system. UMG were also doing finished goods deals at this time, so at least I had a little bit of understanding on the process. Their minimum requirement at this time was 1,000 units for a straight reissue, 1,500 for anything with bonus tracks. That didn't sound too bad. While waiting on the original title I requested, in October 2017 I sent in 2 others. The first album by Pseudo Echo, Exhibit A by Torch Song, featuring William Orbit. In the first days of 2018, I sent in 3 more reissue requests. See the Whirl by Delta 5, Black Mass by Lucifer, Sanctuary by The Passions. I was told they didn't own the Delta 5 album, that the original label had been divested to Warner. When I asked Warner about it, they said Universal owned it. With no one being able to confirm who currently owned the album, I couldn't move forward. At this point, I was sent the new account setup forms they require to get me set up as a client in their system, which is something I had also done with Sony. In February, I checked in to see if there had been any feedback on any of the requests I had sent in going back 5 months. I was told they had found the Trees contract and had keyed it into the system, and was asked to send along project details so he could put together a deal memo. I was told they had not yet located the contract for Torch Song, so that one was still on hold, while there was a misunderstanding about the Pseudo Echo title, and he said they didn't control it outside of Australia. That was my mistake because I submitted it under the name Autumnal Park, which is what the album was called outside of North America. I would resend it at a later time as the self-titled album, and it was able to start moving forward. In early March, I received deal memos for 3 of my requests, including the Lucifer album. I was to sign this document and send it to him as confirmation of my interest in moving forward with the project. The cost on this one was $4 per unit at 1,000 units. Yes, please. I was pleasantly surprised when I received final clearance on this only about 7 weeks later. Wow! I requested this in January, received the deal memo in March, and already got final clearance in April? This seemed to be much better than working with Sony. I was introduced to someone in production that would be working with me on this project. He provided me the templates to use for the artwork and said they were researching the master tapes. He said they managed to locate an album master overseas, and I received a link from Abbey Road Studios to download the high-resolution flat transfer to remaster. The downloads occasionally include scans of the master tape box and any inserts, like this one. I was puzzled why they didn't have a tape source in the USA, but was just happy they found one. It wouldn't be until the following year when the details of the 2008 Universal Vault fire in California became highly known through the New York Times article on the subject. I would hear that the most affected catalogs from the disaster were MCA and A&M. With the Lucifer album originally released on the UNI label, which was a subsidiary of MCA, I think it's safe to assume what happened to the original master tapes. My history with this album goes back to the mid-1970s. My mom came home from a garage sale with the scary-looking black album cover. I was intrigued by it, especially when pulling it out of the sleeve and seeing the colorful label on the record. Remember, I was only about 5 or 6 years old at the time, so pretty colored labels were all I needed to want to hear what was on the record. At this age, I didn't even know what the words meant. Lucifer, Incubus, Exorcism, Voodoo. But I played it and I liked the spooky sounds that came out of it. I'm guessing the album ended up beat to hell by my young hands and likely ended up in the trash by the end of the decade. While I occasionally thought about the album over the years, I never seemed to run across it when browsing cheapy vinyl bins. In 2016, I got serious about wanting to hear it again for the first time since I was in my single digits, but I chose to avoid YouTube uploads because I wanted the experience to come from the actual LP. I located several copies on eBay. It had apparently been reissued a number of times over a 10-year span from its original release and on many different label variations. I wanted the colorful swirly label that I had as a kid, so that's the one that I bought. At the time, the album was pretty collectible. I think I paid about $40 for this copy in moderate condition. When I played the album, it all came flooding right back to me, like someone opened a long dormant closet. I was surprised at how clearly I remembered it. It's amazing how much a child's mind retains, not like nowadays when my short-term memory is practically non-existent. Black Mass was another album by Moog pioneer Mort Garson under a pseudonym and was originally released in 1971. It was only after I got this album again in 2016 that I found Garson had done the similarly themed album The Unexplained under the pseudonym of Adoraxia in 1975. It was listening to it on YouTube that confirmed I needed to get a copy of that one as well, which turned out to be my first release. Catalog number 4 was released through my website on June 29, 2018. Around this time, I was looking into finding a distributor for my releases, and like everything else associated with this business for a blind newbie, it wasn't easy. A lot of people never replied, and some that did only wanted to distribute vinyl products. Boo! I ended up signing up with CD Baby, which at least got the album listing on some websites, but it was very limited. But drama was just around the corner. In late November 2018, I got a message through Facebook from someone telling me they represent the late Mort Garson estate, meaning his daughter since she was his only heir. They wanted to talk to me about my interest in the Plantasia album. Plantasia is another Garson Moog album that came out in 1976, an album that was supposed to be soothing sounds for plant health. And oddly enough, you could only get it at a mattress factory. How weird is that? Sure, it sounds all new agey and a bit flaky, but it is a cool album, but very, very rare at the time. I paid close to $200 for a sealed copy. That's by far the most I ever paid for an LP. I had attempted to reach out to Garson's daughter in the past about licensing it, but never got a reply. The person contacting me through Facebook said they wanted to have a phone call to discuss the licensing of the album. When the call happened, I was immediately blindsided. They told me right away they were a legal firm representing the Garson estate and that another label had already licensed the Plantasia album for reissue, but they wanted to talk to me about the legalities regarding my 2 Garson CD reissues. Their claim was that the Garson estate owned the albums and mine were legally questionable. I told them I had properly licensed the albums from Sony and UMG, all of which goes through legal reviews of original contracts and licensing. They didn't feel that was accurate and wanted me to forward them information regarding my licenses. I've barely started my label and I'm already faced with this sort of bullshit? I forwarded them some of the information and gave them contacts for both labels. I also sent emails to the primary contacts at both labels to inform them of the situation. In the end, it was confirmed that the label still owned the rights to the albums, but the sneaky way this firm duped me into a phone call under false pretenses was pretty shady. This was the first of many titles that encouraged certain buyers to send enthusiastic emails expressing excitement at this first ever CD reissue, and the first time it had been officially reissued on any format in nearly 40 years. Looking back on the package now, I'm still very pleased with the inserts and design. The CD label was a little disappointing because I didn't realize the white layer that goes on the CD before the color ink was something that needed to be specifically asked for, so it ended up with areas of translucence. I also think I would have done the remastering a little bit differently. Since the Adoraxia master needed little in the way of enhancements and improvements, I kept my tweaking on Lucifer at a minimum. But since these are all my children, I can't help but scrutinize things that most people would probably never even notice. The album Sleep Convention by an artist calling himself Trees was the album I wanted to reissue that led me to Universal. Trees was Dane Conover, a multi-instrumentalist singer-songwriter who released one album in 1982 that's often categorized as synthpop. Trees was one of the artists I had read about in Trouser Press that ended up on my list of unfamiliar albums to keep an eye out for. While it was on my list for some time, I didn't hear anything from the album until the semi-legendary MTV2 A to Z video marathon. This marathon was misadvertised, as the channel was supposedly going to air every video in the MTV library from A to Z by song title and was to start on January 1st, 2000. That is, assuming the world wasn't going to spontaneously combust as the Y2K bug destroyed the planet. I rushed to get DirecTV installed by the big day because I intended to live and breathe the marathon. Being at the height of my video collecting, this sounded like a holy grail opportunity. Within the first day, I found the marathon was a 12-hour block of videos played twice in a day. This allowed me to record 6-hour blocks and then scan through to pick out the videos I wanted to record in off-air quality during the re-airing of the block. This required me setting my alarm clock multiple times a night to ensure I got up to record the video before falling back in bed. Yes, seriously. I did this for the entire 3.5 months the marathon aired. When all was said and done, there were loads of music videos that didn't actually air for one reason or another, but a treasure chest of rarities did make it to air, so I had little to complain about. I still have all of my original VHS tapes. During the C song titles, a video called Come Back by Trees aired.
Today's videos on MTV2 are brought to you by the letter C.
It was catchy and quirky, and the music video was very of its day. It was shot on videotape rather than film, and prominently featured a white background with a variety of colorful characters coming and going. The singer was this nerdy guy with big glasses and bad rhythm, but endearing charm. I was into it.
Hey baby, oh, what to do? I got the shakes, I feel blue.
When they got to the S song titles, another Trees video called Shock of the New aired.
Today's videos on MTV2 are brought to you by the letter S.
Very similar to the earlier video, but the song was even better.
Swept up in a fever, must be a rage. Yeah.
I had to have this album, so I got online and found a mint condition promo copy. With a press kit. For $15. When I played the album, I quickly loved it. I would meet Dane Conover years later online, and it was this interaction that helped motivate me to try to license the album as one of my possible first CD reissues. I asked him why he chose the name Trees rather than just using his name. He explained that people often get his name wrong, and he felt this would be a less confusing option. Makes sense. It turns out there were also 2 other videos from the album, which were apparently part of those dropped from airing on the video marathon. This included what might be the most popular song from the album, Delta Sleep.
To sleep again, stay there while I can.
As mentioned earlier, when I first contacted UMG in September 2017 about the album, the contract had to be found and keyed into the system. This took about half a year. I got the deal memo in late April 2018 and received final clearance in late May. I had been in contact with Dane and someone I will refer to only as someone associated with the artist during the duration. We'd had several phone calls, and I found him quite a character. Dane was sending me a bunch of his original cassettes of unreleased songs because we had the plan the reissue would include 12 bonus tracks. This included 2 alternate versions of songs from the album, originally rejected by the label. The other 10 songs were said to have been planned for the second album that never was, which was to be titled Pandora's Box. I put great attention into transferring the cassettes from Dane in the best quality, which included aligning the tape heads to each individual track prior to transferring to the PC. A big snag came to light early on, which was that the master tapes for Sleep Convention could not be found. The only thing UMG had was one reel of the multitracks and nothing else. When the story about the UMG fire came out the following year, and the fact that the MCA label, which is what Sleep Convention was released on, was one of the most affected, that explained the lack of masters. Unfortunately, since the album didn't have a release outside of the USA, despite an erroneous Discogs entry, it explained why there wasn't an alternate tape source in another archive. So yes, I had to remaster the original 10 album tracks from my vinyl LP. Another potential snag arose when this person associated with the artist suddenly wanted to change out a few of the extra tracks for others. By this time, all deals had been signed and everything was in place, so this was a very uncomfortable request. Despite my misgivings, I did email the request to UMG, but by the following day, I feared this 11th hour change was going to jeopardize the reissue, so I followed up to tell UMG to please disregard the change request. I couldn't believe that after all the time that had already gone into the project that this out-of-left-field change was even suggested. When I notified this person associated with the artist that I withdrew the change request, I got a reply that, since it was Dane's music, the change shouldn't have been a big deal. It obviously is a big deal if the reissue is a very low priority to the label and this late request would require a whole new contract to be prepared. I wasn't going to take that chance. The impression I already had of this person associated with the artist is they had a need for control, whereas Dane came across as very easygoing and laid back. Dane provided sleeve notes and photos from the recording sessions for the booklet. I made a nice collage of the photos and sprinkled others within the booklet with his words overlaid on top. Sleep Convention finally saw its CD released on August 10, 2018 through my website. I kept the fact that the master tapes were gone from being public knowledge, but since I'm very skilled at remastering from vinyl so it sounds like a master tape, no one picked up on it. I was regularly getting inquiries from this person associated with the artist on the sales numbers. While I will always think Sleep Convention is a great album, I think the expectations from the side of the artist might have been a bit unrealistic. It sounded like there was this thought that this was going to explode and bring Dane's talents to a much wider audience. While I agree it should be more appreciated, I was realistic that it would remain a niche album with a small but faithful fan base. Since the reissue included bonus tracks, it was a minimum pressing of 1,500 units. While I did finally find a real distributor around this time and got it a larger release, it didn't fly off the shelf. By the end of the contract, it had moved nearly 1,000 units, although most of them seemed to be during sales when I would drop the price to $5.99. A lot of people who had never heard the album and took a chance on it absolutely loved it, so I'm pleased that we were able to add some new recruits during this time. However, as the sales became extremely light to non-existent, and I was getting a lot of other releases taking up space in my basement warehouse, I had to make the decision to send the last 500 copies to a media destruction service and take the write-off. I needed the room. I'm still generally pleased with the package. I admit to not being the biggest fan of the font I used in the booklet, but I wanted something more prominent for those of us with aging eyes. My biggest disappointment was that I incorrectly listed the song Don't Look in Her Eyes on the back insert as Don't Look Her in the Eyes. Oops. The remastering still holds up, and I was able to make all the bonus material sound pretty decent, considering they came from 40-year-old cassettes, in most cases. One thing that did piss me off is that UMG took no time at all putting Sleep Convention up on streaming and download services. At least the first 12 tracks, since those are the ones that they own. I can't say whether or not this impacted my sales at all, but I'm assuming it didn't help. How nice of them to take the work I did on the album, especially since they didn't even have the master tapes anymore, and immediately start potentially impeding my sales. Gotta love that corporate mindset. I got a contact within Warner in August 2017, courtesy of the well-known sound engineer Bill Inglot, who had a long history of remastering albums for Warner and other labels. I took a long lunch break at work, and Bill and I had a really good 2-hour conversation. Bill sent an email introducing me to the primary reissue contact at Warner. Right away, I sent in 5 reissue requests. Charisma, Fido, Fay Ray, contact you. Espressos, Promises and Ties. SPK, Machine Age Voodoo. Peter Schilling, Things to Come. He quickly informed me they had lost the rights to the Fay Ray album. The contact was a very friendly guy and suggested a phone conversation to discuss details further. I was curious, as the info he had provided in email stated the deals were to be 3,000 unit minimum, which concerned me. During the phone conversation, he said he'd be fine with a 1,000 unit minimum, especially with the artists I was requesting. I told him I had heard in the past that there would be a higher unit guarantee required if I requested anything with bonus tracks, as it would be viewed as a compilation. He said that was no longer a thing. Bonus tracks would be fine. He explained that while they also do finished goods deals, it's a bit different than Sony and UMG. Warner would require that I provide the artwork printed inserts, which would need to be sent to their manufacturer for assembly when the CD is in production. I would also be required to pay for the shipping of the final product to my home. Because I would be responsible for paying these independently of the label, those would not be part of any price quotes. He did say that since Warner are a more artist-centric label, they do charge more than other majors to ensure the artist gets more in royalties. I wanted to assure him that I'm serious about these inquiries and that I'm dedicated to building a catalog for my label. He admitted that a lot of prospective clients who contact him never do follow through, which I suspected might be why other labels have been so light on their pursuit of the titles I've requested, and why it only seems that things move after a series of follow-ups. When I told him that I had a few Universal titles released with more coming, he was in shock. He said that most of his clients who contact Universal never get a response. And not only was he surprised that I'd managed a clearance, he was amazed that I had received multiple. Why the heck is that? Isn't the point of these reissue people within the majors to fulfill client requests rather than ignoring them? Maybe I'm just naive about business. The call was great, and he was extremely friendly and very willing to answer all of my questions. It was a complete night and day experience from working with Sony, and better than UMG because I had asked the primary contact there about having a phone call, but he showed no interest. In September, I got an update that SPK and Charisma were in USA clearance, but that Espressos and Peter Schilling needed to go through international offices, and that could take a while. That sounds familiar. He also asked me to keep the new reissue requests coming. I'm loving this guy. An additional request I sent in was for the unreleased album by the band Blue Zoo. This band is best known for their UK hit single, Cry Boy Cry, from the album 2x2 that came out in 1983. 2x2, a mediocre album at best, was the more commercially acceptable album, at least by the original label standards after they rejected the original recordings intended for the first album when they were deemed not commercial enough. Having heard some of the scrap tracks, and with the band being more partial to the original album, I wanted to see if I could license it. But again, this was another Foreign Office request. You know what that means. In March, I got clearances for SPK and Charisma. Woohoo! The per unit cost of SPK was $5.33, Charisma was $5.19. That's not too bad, even considering I would be handling the print and shipping myself. I was sent the required paperwork to get set up in their systems and began preparing the artwork. I was also notified that the person who normally works on Foreign Office reissue requests had recently left the company and there was no replacement at the moment, so those were on hold. Something that differs very much between Warner USA and Warner UK is that here they will not approve any artwork elements that were not part of the original release, whereas in the UK they don't seem to have any restrictions, judging by the third-party reissues I have on import. But I didn't know how strict it was until I submitted my SPK proofs for review, including the USA album cover on the front, with a very different UK album cover on the back, making it reversible. I also had a banned photo under the CD tray. These were rejected and I had to keep it very minimal. With Chrisma, I originally had the banned photos from the album cover under the CD tray as well. They rejected this, telling me I wasn't even allowed to repeat a photo more than it was on the original release. These restrictions and the fact that neither of the original USA LPs had custom inner sleeves are why both of these are blank on the insides of my CDs. But fun was in the air. I worked with the local print shop to do the print materials for the SPK and Chrisma CDs. I used their CD templates and looked forward to seeing the results. When I drove out to pick them up, I excitedly opened the boxes in the car and was immediately horrified. For some reason, the sizes were incorrect and the final prints were squeezed very narrow. They were too small to even fit in a jewel case. What the hell? I marched right back in and showed them the unusable mess. They checked the specs on my order and said they were correct, so they're not sure what happened. They said they'd line up the job again and give me a call in the next week or so when completed. When I was notified the reprint was done, I headed back out to pick it up. Are you kidding me? This time they were the correct sizes, but there were scuffs all over them. Have we ever heard of quality control? It turns out they printed these digitally instead of on offset printing presses, which is what I had specified they use. Once again, I told them this is unacceptable and they needed to redo it again properly and on the offset printers. The following week, they finally got it right. Third time's the charm. I got the master tape transfers for SPK in April. While they originally thought one track had no master available, they apparently found it because it was in the package that I downloaded. The Chrisma masters were received a few days later. This one was from the absolute original tapes because several of the songs that faded on the album had no fades on the master. They just stopped abruptly. So it was up to me to review the fades on the original LP and apply them during the remastering process. I was disappointed to find that they claimed to have none of the original masters for the bonus tracks. None. I ended up having to master all of the extras from vinyl. By the end of May, everything was ready for the manufacturer, which was Technicolor in Tennessee, the same one UMG was using. We were awaiting the codes that I needed to include on the outside of the boxes so they would know what project it was for. This took some time as I was informed there were some departments moving within the manufacturer. I got the codes for Chrisma towards the end of June and quickly sent the package to the manufacturer. The codes for SPK were received in early July, but the manufacturer claimed they hadn't yet received the Chrisma art I had sent, despite the tracking number showing it is delivered. I held the SPK print back until we could find out where Chrisma was. After a couple of weeks, my contact was trying to get somewhere with Technicolor on the whereabouts of my confirmed delivered print. No results. So, I took it upon myself to track down phone numbers and make various phone calls to Technicolor. Finally, a month after delivery, they managed to find the boxes of print sitting in some random office and sent a photo along to confirm. My Warner contact said he was impressed that I got results after his inquiries yielded little. I appreciated the efforts he had made, but it seemed the manufacturer just wasn't giving it much concern, so I took matters into my own hands. Either way, now with the print finally found, I could send off SPK and hope for better. Luckily, no issues with receiving the SPK print, but they managed to misplace the master files needed for the actual CDs, so I had to send them over again. My Warner contact was very apologetic and determined to push the titles into production as soon as possible. None of this was his fault, and I felt bad for him being dragged into it, but he was always friendly and willing to help. By mid-August, the manufacturing still hadn't been done. Since I now had email contact information for those within Technicolor, I started sending messages to find out what's the holdup now. They said there was a delay in replicating the CDs in Mexico, which are then shipped to Tennessee for assembly. This ended up escalated to the general manager. What a long mess this has turned into. The SPK CD was completed and shipped, with Chrisma following soon after. But the problems were not over yet. While SPK was shipped on a pallet and arrived without issue, for some idiot reason, Chrisma was shipped by FedEx Ground as individual 30-count CD boxes. What could possibly go wrong? If sending by FedEx Ground, they are supposed to have been consolidated and overboxed. This here is an industry standard example. I ask for so much. To no one's surprise, many of the boxes were beat to hell during shipping, and there was a large amount of damaged units. Going through the boxes, there was also a number of copies in which the CD fold-out was inserted too far into the jewel case and was buckled and damaged. Then came the chore of counting all the damages, waiting for Technicolor to credit Warner, and then Warner to credit me. Technicolor had proven themselves a train wreck. And all of that is why what was thought to have possibly been my first 2 releases became the 4th and 5th. Anyone still want to start a record label? We're just getting started. SPK, Machine Age Voodoo, was officially released through my website on August 24th, 2018, with Chrisma, Fido, released the following week on August 31st. While I had distribution set up at this time, I made a decision that I would stick with during the duration of my label. I would have new releases only available on my website for a couple of weeks to a month because it was to my benefit. When a title goes into distribution, there's a lot that comes off the price before the label gets their cut. First, the retail price is a suggested price the store is supposed to charge, but when a store buys stock from the distribution warehouse, they pay a wholesale price, which is often several dollars less than the retail price. Then, there are additional fees taken by the distributor and the warehouse. By this time, I would still make a little profit for each distribution sale, but I would always get the most if buyers purchased at retail price off my website. My distributor was fine with this. I discovered SPK during my video collecting days in the late 1990s. Starting in the early 80s, there were music video subscription services called Rock America and Telegenics. Bars and nightclubs could sign up for a subscription and they'd be sent 1-hour compilations of music videos once or twice a month. These would include most genres, and they were often a goldmine for complete videos in great quality. Well, for VHS anyway. I had put an ad in Goldmine magazine looking for these subscription tapes. I got a reply from someone who had a massive amount of Telegenics originals from 1983 to 1987. He offered to send these to me for a small fee and allow me to make copies of everything. I was stunned that he was willing to send the originals, but I jumped at the opportunity. I painstakingly copied each tape in the best quality and either had great quality copies of favorites that I'd only had lesser quality multi-generation copies of, or I discovered new artists I hadn't known previously. I still have my original VHS tapes. Can you read that? One of those discoveries was SPK. The music video for Machine Age Voodoo was on one of the 1984 tapes, and I liked the dance vibe with the industrial sounds. The singer had a great voice, and I ended up purchasing the album on the strength of this song. A CD reissue had come out in the past on the Wounded Bird label, but didn't contain any bonus tracks. That's the part I wanted to rectify because, like a lot of albums in the early 80s, there was a different track on the UK LP that wasn't on the USA LP. I was able to include that track along with all related remixes that Warner had the rights to for the album, which includes the second single, Flesh and Steel, complete with Electro Frog intro. Charisma was another band I discovered during video collecting. I got a bunch of multi-generation copies of several Rock America tapes. With Rock America starting in 1980 and Telegenics in 1983, it was the Rock America collections that had the heavier focus on new wave. I saw this very bizarre video called Water by a band called Charisma. The video was all sorts of weird imagery, and it reminded me of a favorite cult movie that both my friend Jay and I loved and would quote all the time, called Liquid Sky. I immediately set out to find this album, but these were the days of internet information being limited. I saw an album called Fido listed in Goldmine and bought it, having no idea if it contained water. It didn't, but it was an interesting album nonetheless. The single from the 1983 album was called Nothing to Do with the Dog, which was very catchy. The album was mainly recorded with a little Casio keyboard, so it had a sort of blippy, beepy video game sound to it. That thing right there. I would eventually find that the album with Water was released in 1982 called Clandestine Anticipation, but it didn't have a USA release. Water only appeared here on a 12-inch single. The band was comprised of a married couple from Italy and had been putting out music together since 1976. Originally, they were known as Charisma, spelled with a CH. They changed this to a K with their 1980 album, Cathode Mama. The music video for Nothing to Do with the Dog was aired during the MTV2 A to Z Video Marathon. It was this crazy video about feeding cookies to children that turned them into animals. I loved it. In the early 2000s, the channel VH1 Classics started their All Request Hour. I will admit that the show was my idea. Oh, but don't thank me just yet. I pitched the concept to the guy overseeing VH1 Classic at the time when he and I had a phone conversation after becoming acquainted through a VH1 Classic message board. I will also admit that it was a very misleading show. While the original idea was to have all the videos during that hour be actual viewer requests, it soon became clear that the majority of it was just their standard playlist. When I had another call with the channel head, he confirmed that only about 3 videos per hour were actual requests, often the ones that had names read on the air. He said this was out of concern that they'd alienate viewers with a bunch of obscure videos. How's that for corporate American values? I was in the process of trying to get some of my favorite videos re-aired since I was now recording video directly into my PC rather than videotape, and I wanted the Charisma video in top quality. This was one of the times I had my name read on the air. Anyone remember this show's opening theme?
It's time for the only show where you decide what classic music videos you get to enjoy all over again by the emails you send in. It's the VH1 Classic All Request Hour. Our first request of the day comes from Scott Davies in Ohio. Scott sent along this message to the Classic team. Can you please play the 1983 video Nothing to Do with the Dog by the duo Charisma? That's a great request, Scott, and we'd be more than happy to play that for you right now. Enjoy. If there's a classic music video that you'd like to see, send an email to vh1classicrequests@vh1.com.
Charisma seemed to have a decent international following, and I felt with Fido being one of their only albums never previously on CD, it would do pretty well. Well, that wasn't the case at all. This CD turned out to be the lowest selling title from my eventual full CD catalog, with only about 600 copies sold before the remaining unmoving stock met the same fate as the leftover Tree CDs and ended up with the Media Destruction Company. I'm glad I did it, but I'm disappointed it didn't have a broader appeal. I tried. After the CD was released, I got an email from the since passed away singer of the duo, Christina Moser, with an accusatory tone about the legitimacy of my reissue. Once again, I had to explain to a suspicious party that I officially licensed the album. I was starting to feel like this was going to happen with every release,